Breaking. A massive drone swarm has closed in on St. Petersburg. A fierce strike leaves Russia reeling as one of its key strongholds comes under pressure. A critical port is blazing and Putin's naval assets are taking heavy hits. The scale of destruction is unlike anything seen before. The Leningrad region is engulfed in flames with precision strikes tearing through strategic targets. Security structures are in disarray as wave after wave of drones overwhelms defenses. Air defense systems are struggling and St. Petersburg's main airport has been forced to halt operations. The scale of this fiery attack will shock you. Let's talk about it. Hello, this is Ukraine Today. Maria Farafonova here with the latest updates. Breaking! Russia's Leningrad region is choking in smoke and flames. Ukrainian drones have turned Vyborg into a full-scale nightmare, unleashing chaos on one of Russia's key Baltic hubs and industrial strongholds. The city is shaken from powerful strikes, with devastating hits reported. This was announced by Petro Andrushenko, head of the Center for the Study of Occupation.
Vyborg, Leningrad region. The port is under attack. Russian air defense is actively operating. There are consequences on the ground. The attack is ongoing.
OSINT communities are buzzing with explosive claims. A massive fire has engulfed a facility belonging to the Agricola company, turning it into a blazing inferno visible from miles. After a UAV attack and the operation of Russian air defense, a building near the FSB caught fire. Was it random? Some believe this is far from coincidence.
Opposite, approximately 30 meters away, is the FSB Border Guard building, the former Finnish Naval Academy. Apparently, the drone may have targeted the FSB building.
Local residents report scenes straight out of a disaster movie. The seaport is allegedly in ruins. After a direct hit, a vessel burst into flames, and footage circulating online shows what appears to be a maritime catastrophe. According to reports, a Russian ship sustained critical damage, listed heavily, and may have sunk into the Baltic Sea before witnesses' eyes. Leading OSINT analysts are now talking about the severe blow to a major oil handling infrastructure hub. Social media is flooded with dramatic footage. Blinding flashes light up the sky. Massive explosions echo across the region, while Russian air defenses seem unable to contain the scale of the attack. Even Russian sources are beginning to admit the seriousness of the situation. The port of Ust-Luga, one of the largest and deepest in the Baltic Sea, capable of handling heavy cargo vessels, is now under direct threat. With 13 terminals, including those used for exporting Russian oil, this critical artery of the Kremlin's economy is no longer untouchable. Panic is spreading across Russian social media. Amid the unprecedented drone wave, Pulkovo airport has effectively ground to a halt, entering a state of near-total shutdown. Flights to Moscow, Istanbul and Dushanbe have been urgently cancelled, while thousands of aircraft remain stuck on the ground due to the ongoing UAV threat in the skies. At the same time, the Belgorod region was hit the hardest. Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov reported a missile strike from Ukraine. According to preliminary data, energy infrastructure facilities were targeted, leading to disruptions in electricity, water and heating supplies. It is reported that around 450,000 people were temporarily left without power. A major escalation. The Kremlin has zeroed in on one of its most prominent adversaries. A Russian court has sentenced Robert Brody, commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces and known as Magyar, to 18 years in a high-security prison in absentia on terrorism-related charges. The move triggered an immediate reaction.
A moment of hype. The goat served is determined. Today, the Rostov Worm Court added the next 18 years of the Strogacha to those previously sentenced to Magyar. This time, for terrorism at refueling stations, fuel and energy facilities in the swamps.
Brody openly suggests that Moscow's anger stems from recent Ukrainian drone strikes on the Transneft Primorsk oil terminal near St. Petersburg. Why is this so sensitive for the Kremlin? Because the nature of the war is shifting. Ukrainian drones are not only hitting targets, they are steadily wearing down Russian capabilities at the pace they struggle to match. According to Brody, drone units are responsible for more than a third of Russian losses while representing only about 2% of Ukraine's forces. His units are set to inflict heavy damage on the enemy while sustaining relatively small losses themselves. This goes beyond isolated operations. It reflects a broader system of sustained attrition. The Tavriska thermal power plant in Crimea has been attacked and a fuel reservoir has caught fire. More details on what is happening right now along the line of contact in our military overview.
In these shots, the SBU and defense forces hit the Primorsk oil terminal in the Baltic Sea. Oil storage tanks are ablaze there.
They've lost a fortune, as they actually say, which is quite a lot. The whole coast is covered in smoke.
On March 21st, the Tavricheskaya thermal power plant came under attack. It is one of the key power plants in Crimea and plays a vital role in the peninsula's energy supply.
In Crimea, there's currently a sea combined strike on targets. Well, I wouldn't really categorize them as strictly military or purely military targets, such as airfields, Russian troop bases, rear command posts, or military economic targets like storage facilities for fuel and lubricants, critical energy infrastructure, important crossings such as the Kerch ferry crossing and the Crimean bridge, both of which are significant logistical points. Well, from purely economic facilities of some kind, like that same Tavricheskaya thermal power plant.
This is the spring of 2022. Exclusive footage of Kiev's defense by an SSO sabotage and reconnaissance group against a Russian DT-30 Vityaz all-terrain vehicle in the Kiev region. Here, the Russians decided to name their drone Prince Oleg the Prophet, but as we can see, it didn't help them, and real warriors destroyed the scammers.
The Russians, after the de facto capture of Pokrovsk, Mirnograd, are shifting their focus. They are moving some of their forces from this sector to the Kostiantynivka direction. Some forces are being moved south towards Huliaipol, right? Some forces are being withdrawn for regrouping. What could this mean? That the occupation has become, an end in itself.
The occupiers wanted Pokrovsk so badly that they've practically run out, in every sense of the word.
It just so happened that over many months, the forces allocated for this operation were worn down at Pokrovsk-Mirnograd, and effectively, having achieved the first objective, they realized they cannot complete the next one. And so the efforts are being scattered across the entire defensive sector, meaning the frontal assault, this one on Kostiantynivka, with an envelopment from three sides, obviously. But still, this is not a strategic operation, it's an operational tactical one.
Being in a less than ideal state, the Russian army continues to ignite hotspots along the front line, not only in Donbass but also in the Kharkiv or Sumy regions, and occasionally in the Chernihiv region. Experts call this the death throes of the winter operation, to build up strength for a summer offensive. But we already know the price Russians pay for their advances, just to achieve even the slightest success.
Russia's spring-summer offensive on the front has failed, and the Kremlin is already preparing to justify this to its population. Meanwhile, Ukrainian defenders are advancing, steadily liberating new territories and inflicting massive losses and damage on the enemy. Full details in the report.
With the arrival of spring, the occupation units, as usual, moved forward. But the current colossal losses suffered by the Russian army in these countless and senseless assaults are already being criticized by even the most pro-Kremlin military bloggers.
On March 19th, the commander of the 144th Motorized Rifle Division, Major General Dmitry Mikhailov, pushed significant forces of his division into an attack on enemy positions. The outcome was tragic. They report the destruction of over 80 units of motorized equipment, 3 tanks, 11 infantry fighting vehicles and armored personnel carriers, 5 artillery pieces, 1 Solnsepyok, and about 160 drones. Of course, if the operational situation allows for large-scale offensive operations, then one should take advantage of that. But the key to all of this is if the situation allows, a commander must rationally weigh the risks and the potential outcome when making a decision, rather than just gambling on luck.
We are talking about the Lyman direction, but on other sectors of the front, the criticism is the same. Exhausting assaults do not yield the desired result and lead to colossal losses.
And Russian generals are simply stepping on the same old rake. Every year the same situation repeats itself. Spring arrives, the soil has already dried out, the mud season is practically over. It's possible to attack. Attack with what? Well, let's go attack with tanks and armored vehicles. Never mind that there are drones in the air. Let's attack with tanks.
The Ukrainian General Staff states that the Russian army has set a new record for losses. In 4 days, from March 19th to 23rd, the occupiers lost 6,100 soldiers. The fact that the occupation forces have begun a massive offensive was also confirmed by the commander-in-chief of the AFU, Syrskyi. The Russian army is trying with all its might at the start of spring to break through the Ukrainian defense.
The enemy tried to break through the defensive formations of our troops in several strategic directions at once. Fierce battles have unfolded along the entire line of combat engagement. In total, the enemy conducted 619 assault actions over these 4 days. The occupiers concentrated their main strike on the Pokrovsk and Oleksandrivka directions, where the highest number of enemy attacks occurred. Specifically, in the Pokrovsk direction, the enemy attacked our troops' positions 163 times, and in the Oleksandrivka direction, 96 times.
Analysts from the American Institute for the Study of War believe that Russia's spring-summer campaign has already failed. Losses are incomparable to the recruitment of new soldiers, and the Kremlin already has little equipment left.
Such a high level of losses is unacceptable, given the current pace of recruitment in Russia, and will likely reduce Russia's ability to conduct such large-scale assaults in the medium and long term.
For now, the Russian army can still afford such large losses, and it is still too early to say that the occupiers' offensive has been thwarted. So far, the AFU has had initial successes, and they need to be consolidated.
A specific attack has been thwarted. So right now, they've thwarted a number of attacks in various directions. But saying that the offensive has been thwarted creates a misunderstanding of the current combat situation on the front line. I mean, it gives the impression that we're talking about the entire Russian offensive operation being completely, thwarted. And now the Russian generals are sitting there scratching their heads like, what do we do? Damn, the plan didn't work. Let's put it on hold for now. Come up with a new direction for the attack and strike there. No, nothing like that is happening. Specific attacks have been thwarted.
According to analysts, Russian troops are unlikely to capture the belt of fortresses in Donbas in 2026. Most likely, they will achieve minor tactical successes, and even then at the cost of heavy losses. Therefore, the top Kremlin officials are already preparing the population for the fact that there will definitely be no major successes at the front this year.
Russian officials are already shaping expectations in the information space regarding relatively slow progress and heavy losses. However, one of the deputies of the Russian State Duma stated on March 23rd that there are casualties in all wars, but Russian troops will try to minimize losses by advancing slowly towards Sloviansk and Kramatorsk.
The spring-summer campaign of 2026 has only just begun, and the armed forces of Ukraine clearly had a successful start. Ukrainian troops are acting proactively and inflicting huge losses on the enemy, but this is only the beginning of the campaign.
Putin has effectively acknowledged the beginning of the downturn in Russia's economy. The dynamics of key macroeconomic indicators at the start of 2026 have turned negative, the dictator stated publicly. What exactly is behind this vague and carefully worded admission? Our journalists break it down next.
Russia is finished. Putin has openly admitted that the country's economy has collapsed.
The statistics confirm this. In January of this year, Russia's gross domestic product was 2.1% lower than it was a year ago. Industrial production fell by 0.8%.
The aforementioned decline in GDP was the first since 2023. Forecasts are worsening, and the prospect of a further downturn could lead to serious social and economic consequences.
Reports that there was an emergency meeting in the Kremlin at night involving Putin, Mishustin, the prime minister, and the economic bloc have become somewhat commonplace. I mean, it feels like they're constantly meeting in a large expanded group discussing economic issues. You know, if you say that everything is fine in the economy, but then practically, well, not daily, but very often, several times a week, meetings take place in the Kremlin at night and last a long time, then something is probably wrong.
Earlier, official sources in Russia had already recorded a sharp slowdown in economic growth. In 2025, it was about 1%, which turned out to be several times lower than the authorities' expectations. The crisis has affected most industries. Out of 28 main sectors of the Russian economy, 21 ended the year in the red. Raw material extraction, the metallurgical industry, and light industry have all declined. In addition, for the first time in 15 years, food production has decreased.
Now, an indicator that people often like to talk about is that restaurants are starting to close in Moscow. Why are restaurants closing? Because the people who usually eat in restaurants no longer have enough funds to eat in restaurants. Consequently, they don't spend money in restaurants. Consequently, restaurants are losing out on profits. And then there's the tax hike. Let's not forget that in Russia, since January of this year, they've raised taxes from 20 to 22% for value-added tax, raised fees, raised other payments, and reduced the number of beneficiaries.
For 2026, the Russian authorities initially predicted economic growth of more than 2%. However, they subsequently revised it down to 1.3%.
It might not just be even lower, it could go into the negative, which is what's being discussed now. Even this Center for Macro Economic Analysis and Short-Term Forecasting I mentioned, which is, well, seemingly run by the brother of the Russian defense minister, you can't get much closer to power. They say that a recession this year is a more than real possibility. So it's not like +1 or +0.8, it's -0.1 or -0.3, but it will be a minus. So now in Russia, the question of whether there will be any growth at all this year is being discussed in all seriousness.
The economic slowdown threatens the Russian budget with a shortfall in revenues not related to the oil and gas industry. Despite the tax reform, which involves raising VAT and taxes on small businesses, according to Russian experts, the treasury could fall short by 500 billion rubles in VAT and about 200 billion rubles in income tax.
The first quarter of the current year hasn't even ended yet, but already in the Russian media space, the phrase is being heard that a budget sequestration is necessary. What is a budget sequestration? It's when they say that, we can't afford the expenses that we planned, so we're going to have to cut those expenditures. But that's logical and often happens around, let's say, October, when it's already clear that the year is ending and it's impossible to meet the budget that was adopted at the start of the year, and accordingly, some actions need to be taken. But here we are hearing these statements in March.
A crisis in Russia could flare up at any moment, because even now most Russian regions are reporting a lack of funds even for priority spending items, paying contracts for military personnel who are going to the war against Ukraine.
The budget that was adopted essentially at the end of December, again, 3 months ago, it is unrealistic. This was discussed when it was being adopted, but back then the main thing was just to pass the budget. Now they admit this lack of realism. The decision by the Moscow mayor's office that staff will be cut by 15%, the statement that the cabinet of ministers will cut budget spending by 10%, these are no longer words, these are already real actions. And so, against the backdrop of these actions, to say that everything is fine in the economy would be very foolish.
Economists note that Russia is facing a typical wartime crisis: rising military spending, a budget deficit, and rising prices for fuel and food.
It's obvious that despite even the fact that in March there will be more revenue from the oil and gas, let's say, sectors, although that's also not certain, because as a rule, it's futures that have risen now, and what comes in this month is the result of previous months, then it's quite possible that the planned deficit for the year will be reached by the end of the first quarter.
Therefore, weak revenues, slowing economic growth, and high war spending will only continue to put pressure on the country's finances in the future.
What do you think about the latest events? Share your opinion in the comments, like the video and subscribe to stay informed about the main headlines. See you soon!